IT, go ahead and start the live stream.
The May 19th, 2023 Oregon State Lottery Commission meeting is now in session. It is noted for the record that commissioners are attending this meeting via the web. Chair Satoff is excused and a quorum of commissioners is present for today's meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the internet and a link is posted on the Oregon Lottery website. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Patel,
Here.
Commissioner Ramirez,
Here.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Here.
Will the clerk please inform the commission of who else is in the meeting?
yes, we have Interim Director Mike Wells, Josh Lehner, Kathy Ortega, Chris Scaro, Matt Shelby, Nate Carter from DOJ, and Ty Calandrello.
Thank you. Members of the public have the opportunity to provide written public comment to the commission for this meeting. Can the clerk please confirm that no public comment was received?
That is correct. We did not receive any public comment this month.
Thank you. And that's moved to the director's report.
Well, good morning, commissioners. It has been a busy month for lottery, so I have a lot to share today. I'd like to start with lottery bonds. So as a reminder, each biennium, the Oregon legislature approves hundreds of millions in lottery-backed bonds to be used for projects across the state. Last month, Lottery, Treasury, and Office of Economic Analysis presented to 3 national credit agencies, Moody's, S&P Global, and Kroll, seeking bond ratings. We're pleased to learn that each of the 3 credit agencies rated Oregon lottery-backed bonds with their highest bond rating, making lottery-backed bonds among the best in the country. In recent years, lottery-backed bonds have been used to fund projects across the state, including Oregon Coast Aquarium in Newport, Eugene's Downtown Riverfront Park Development, Woodburn Community Center, North Plains Public Works Emergency Operations Center, and many others. We're excited to see what this new set of bonds will do in our state in the coming years. And I just want to thank all of our staff that helped in preparation for those presentations. It takes a lot of work, a lot of teamwork to get ready for that. So thank you. Moving on, internally, as you guys know, we have dedicated funds and been working diligently over the last several years to modernize many of our obsolete and failing systems internally. Well, I'm happy to report that after 2 years of planning and development, this week we successfully launched the well-known customer relationship management platform Salesforce. That phase of the project has moved both our call center and our technical services teams onto the new platform. This has been a huge undertaking, and I want to thank all of our staff for a job well done, both in its development and successfully and timely launching this new platform. So over the next few years, we're going to continue to incorporate Salesforce in other areas of lottery and move other systems over to Salesforce. So we're excited where we're going. Earlier this month, Lottery joined other state agencies in celebrating Public Service Recognition Week. Will all lottery employees support our beneficiaries by providing public service to our state? 3 individuals nominated by staff were chosen to receive the Ambassador of Public Service Award. And I wanted to take a moment to specifically highlight the work of the 3 individuals and share a few words from their nominations. So first off, Bobby Bones is a supervisor in technical support. Throughout the pandemic, Bobby was in the office, making sure his team was able to meet their deadlines and helped other departments that didn't have a presence within the building. He's always quick to volunteer for all 3 of Lottery's fundraising events and is always offering suggestions on how to improve efficiency within the lottery. Our next ambassador is Chris Haskell, a supervisor in our retail channel. Chris is known for having a helpful attitude and excellent communication skills. According to his nomination, when he says he will do something, it gets done. Never one to judge, Chris is always looking for ways to make those around him feel better. And our third ambassador, Christina Sin, works in player services up in Wilsonville. Christina has an amazing skill of talking to upset customers and ending the conversation with them feeling valued and heard. It's not a surprise. Her coworkers describe her as being kind-hearted and friendly. I want to congratulate these three ambassadors and thank you to all lottery employees who demonstrate a commitment to serving the public. On Tuesday, Oregon Lottery joined Department of Education in honoring Zandra Jasma of Three Rivers School District as the Education Support Professional of the Year. Zandra is the office manager at the Southern Oregon Success Academy, a charter school serving the greatest population of at-risk youth. Her nomination praised Zandra's efforts to go above and beyond to develop personal connections with students, from finding the resources they need to providing emotional support and understanding. Lottery supports this award by providing Xander with $5,000 and a commemorative plaque. And a matching plaque and banner were also awarded to the school to mark Xander's achievements and her impact in the Three Rivers community. So this program is a result of House Bill 2964, passed by Oregon legislature back in 2019 to establish the award and honor any education support professional serving students in any grade from pre-kindergarten through grade 12. In other news, this weekend, the Oregon Lottery is sponsoring the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs Women's Veterans Conference, a biennial event here in Salem. Women veterans from across our state will be celebrating their contributions, diversity, and strength of their community. There are close to 450 attendees registered for the conference, and this is the first time they'll be back in person in quite a few years. So we're excited for that. Moving on to sales. So overall, our sales are down slightly from last year at the same point in time by 1.2%. We're seeing video lottery trend downward a bit, 5.2% compared to last year. Scratch It sales are also continuing to trend downward from the peak of the pandemic, so down 4.4% below last year, but remain ahead of the 2020 numbers, so by 11.9%, and in 2019, 19.5%. However, we're seeing some different trends in our jackpot games. Due to the billion-dollar jackpots in July, November, and January, year-to-date sales for Powerball and Mega Millions are ahead of all previous years. Powerball is ahead of last year by 32%, Mega Millions by 144%. Last month, I mentioned new marketing campaign that was underway for our Win for Life game. Due to the campaign, average weekly Win for Life sales are actually up 17%, now averaging 87,000 when compared to the 13-week average of the prior campaign, which was about 75,000. Regarding sports betting, we're seeing a steady increase in turnover, or the amount wagered over previous years. Compared to last year, turnover is up 46%. And later in the agenda, Josh Leonard from OEA will be providing you some information regarding our upcoming revenue forecast. And moving on to some winner stories. Our latest Win for Life winner is Robin R. of Hubbard, a truck driver who has played the game regularly since it launched in 2001. He recently purchased his winning ticket at the Woodburn liquor store, learning of his big win Monday night when checking his numbers online. Robin plans to use his winnings to pay bills, make home improvements to a home he purchased 3 years ago with his wife, Debbie, and vacation in St. Lucia to mark the couple's upcoming wedding anniversary. While making a delivery to AM/PM, Derek H. decided to purchase a Sevens on Fire Scratch-It. He drove around the corner and pulled over to check his ticket, where he discovered he had won one of the top 3 prizes for that game, which was $100,000. Derek plans to pay off his car with that money. And lastly, Charles K. of Hillsborough won $50,000 in our second chance game for the $5 stocking stuffer Scratch-It he had originally purchased. Charles has been experiencing some bad luck lately and believes this win is his break. He's looking forward to fixing his truck and paying it off. Charles is a regular Scratch-It player and hopes for another big win. And that concludes my director's report for this month.
Thank you.
Can I add something there, Commissioner Patel?
Yeah.
I just want to add my congratulations to lottery staff, ambassadors, Bobby, Chris, and Christina. It sounds like they're consistently going beyond expectations. Keep up the great work. And also congratulations to the big winners this month. Sounds like there's some great stories there.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Wilcox.
The minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated to the commission in advance of today's meeting. If there are no changes to the minutes, is there a motion to approve?
I move that the minutes of the Oregon State Lottery Commission meeting held on April 21st, 2023 be approved as final as presented today.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Patel,
Aye.
Commissioner Ramirez,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Aye.
For the record, the motion has passed. And now we'll be looking at the financial report.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners, Interim Director Wells. I'm Kathy Ortega, Chief Financial Officer for the Oregon Lottery, and we are going to look at the financial statement through the end of April, which means we have another 2 months to go before this year is finalized, but the year is starting to shape up. I think we can see a trend on where we're going to end for the rest of the year. Looking at the operating statement, net revenue of 118.5 on a budget of 117.2 is 1.2 million favorable. We have some timing differences this month. Not going to specifically address them because we're still in very good shape throughout the year on all of our spending categories. Net profit for the month was 78.9 on a budget of 75.4, 3.4 million favorable. Looking at the year-to-date statement, we have, let's see if I can get this one out, $1,177,000,000 actual on a budget of $1,165,000,000, 12 almost 4 million favorable to budget. The commission expense is favorable because we have such a large positive revenue variance. We're earning more revenue, but that means we're also spending money on commissions. Salaries, benefits, and wages is called out this month only because I wanted to report that we have received our PERS allocation for fiscal 23, and so we're adjusting our reserves and getting that booked. The amount of the PERS entry for this year is 20 million, which is high. It bounced around. Last year was a credit of 9 million. The year before, a hit of 27 million. And so this is going to continue to be a significant portion of our salaries, benefits, and wages in the upcoming years. And it is an allocation as opposed to a direct incurred expense. Net profit of 771.7 million on a budget of 716.7 million is almost 55 million favorable to budget. Taking a look at the services and supplies schedule for the current month and the year to date, there's a little timing difference in there, but we're still significantly under budget in all categories on the services and supplies. I also have the balance sheet for you to take a look at for today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the commission?
None from me.
Is there a motion to approve the monthly financial statements?
I move that the Oregon State Lottery financial statements for month ended April 30th, 2023 be approved for the record as presented today.
Do I hear a second?
Second,
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Patel,
Aye.
Commissioner Ramirez,
aye.
Commissioner Wilcox,
Aye.
For the record, the motion is passed.
Thank you.
Next, we'll be looking at the lottery revenue forecast.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Josh Lehner with the Office of Economic Analysis. It's great to be back with you all for our twice a year check-in. In our office, we just released the latest economic and revenue forecasting for the state on Wednesday. Overall, an improved economic and revenue outlook, especially when it comes to personal income taxes and corporate taxes. For the state, for the general fund, lottery revenues are up about 1% in the next biennium relative to 3 months ago. We've raised the forecast about 1%, and it's relatively flat resources. I'll talk about at the end, biennium to biennium, but that's a little bit of an improved outlook, just given where we think consumer spending and things will be. But from a general fund and state overall budget perspective, up a lot more than that. So I'm going to share my slides. I brought a handful of the things we talked about with the legislature the other day, and a couple new things specifically for this. First, it can be important, thinking about how Oregonians are doing and how much money they have and how they choose to spend their money on, household staples or rent or discretionary items and things like that. One thing we've seen this cycle overall is that's different than in the past is typically Oregon's economy is more volatile, more boom bust than the US average, more boom bust than the typical state. And that hasn't been the case during the pandemic and since then. We're right kind of in the middle of the pack, which is a bit unusual, where we're actually a little below average on job growth since before the pandemic. Our recovery is complete. It's been inclusive. It's been very strong, but it's actually trailed the nation a little bit. We're 30th out of 50 when it comes to the employment growth. We're doing a bit better on income. We're still in the middle of the pack, but we're 21st for income growth relative to the US or relative to the 50 states. And then we're significantly outpacing on GDP output, like how much we're producing and selling in the economy and things like that. We're 11th out of 50 on that end. And this pattern here is also kind of the reverse of what we saw in the 1990s and the 2000s, where job growth and population growth are things that Oregon has historically excelled at. Whereas this cycle, our job growth is a little below average and our population growth has been lagging. We're below average as well. So the jobs and the population are lagging, but we're outpacing on income and GDP, which is what we also trailed on. Like a lot has been talked about our lower than average incomes, our per capita income, our median household income, things like that. In the 90s and the 2000s, we trailed the nation by quite a lot. That started to shift, 2015, 2016, 2017 time period. We started to make up a lot of that lost ground from an income perspective, and that's just continued during the pandemic. And our incomes in Oregon for the typical household are 2.5% higher than they are nationwide. And so the composition of our growth has shifted away from just jobs and population and more towards income and productivity. And so there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to grow the economy, but this relative pattern, this relative shift is something we hadn't seen in decades and generations. And so it's something we're keeping an eye on. The good news there is that the average Oregonian has a lot more money in their pocket than they used to, and more so than in the typical state. And so they're able to pay their bills a little bit better, although we have a higher cost of living and things like that. On the labor market, another thing to think about moving forward for the next biennium as we enter into this upcoming 23-25 budget period is the economy is basically at full employment, right? The number of people with a job or actively looking for a job today in Oregon is basically what you would expect it to be based upon demographics. And what I mean by that is the chart on the left, labor force participation rate. This is the share of all Oregonians 16 years and older who has a job or is looking for work. You can see it's been declining for 20 years, more or less. And a lot of that has to do with the aging population. As the baby boomers are entering into their retirement years, that's going to mean there's more people calculated in this standard economic measure that are retired. They're not going to have a job. They're not going to be looking for work because they're retired. And so that's been pulling down this number for quite some time. But you can see we've now kind of made our way back to that trend line. Now there's some compositions here where we have more 60 somethings and 70 somethings, a little bit more than working today than we did 20, 30 years ago. On a percentage basis, and a little bit less for teenagers, right? The teenage employment is lower today than it was 20 years ago, right? Kids aren't getting summer jobs like they used to, that sort of thing. So we've seen a little bit of an age composition within this, but overall, our economy, our labor market is at basically full employment and what you would expect it to be. So what that really means is growth will slow in the future because there's not a bunch of unemployed people that we need to put back to work. We've done all that hard work there, putting people back to work. And so growth in jobs and labor is going to be more closely tied to underlying gains in the population moving forward, just because nearly everybody who wants a job has a job. The composition of that growth over the next 2 years is the chart on the right, where it's kind of the reverse of what we've seen during the pandemic, where some of the sectors that have lagged a bit more than they usually do, healthcare, leisure, and hospitality, are expected to see above average gains in the years ahead because they're still kind of playing catch up, right? The employment at bars and restaurants is lower today than it was pre-pandemic. They haven't fully recovered. Eventually they will. And so we're going to see a little bit of catch up there as consumer spending and going out to eat and going on vacations and all that sort of stuff is booming right now. The service sector of the economy, the service side of the economy is just booming today. The good side of the economy, the e-commerce, the physical goods, the stuff that boomed earlier in the pandemic is taking a back seat now. It's slowed down. It's not declining, but it's taken a step back as we've kind of gone back to our everyday living and social gatherings and vacations and that sort of stuff. And so we see sectors like construction, like manufacturing, like transportation and warehousing, the ones that boomed earlier in the pandemic, we're expecting to see below average growth in the years ahead, just because they've had so much growth in recent years. We don't think that's sustainable or will be repeated just due to that shift back to services in the economy. The other thing I would note are structural issues related to brick and mortar retail at the bottom and education related at the bottom. Brick and mortar retail has been, relatively stable. It's a large sector of the economy, but it's not a growth sector, right? Just with the rise of e-commerce and the step back of brick and mortar retail, it's been more stable over the long run. And so we don't think there's a lot of growth in retail. Risk or maybe to the downside a little bit with more, big box bankruptcies at some point. We've seen a lot of those in the last 20 years. Maybe there'll be some more. We'll find out. But the other one would be education. We have a declining school age population in the state of Oregon. We've had a declining birth rate for 20 years. We now have a declining K-12 population, and that's expected to continue in the years ahead. And so you would think there'll be less demand, less need for education-related employment in the state. The issue here would be if we were underfunded, understaffed on education to begin with, maybe we wouldn't see as large of employment declines as you would think, given the population trends. But time will tell exactly how that plays out. Unfortunately, the recession risks are still real. A lot of the story we told the other day, and we continue to tell about the likely path of the economy, are relatively good news. But the recession risks are still real. Inflation is still significantly faster than the Federal Reserve's 2% target. As such, it means ultimately, if inflation doesn't slow down in the next year, the Federal Reserve is going to have to resume raising interest rates and probably send the economy into recession at some point in the future to bring inflation back down to target. And so those risks, we think, are pushed off. And, there's been some economists, some forecasters have been calling for imminent recession. There's a recession now. We're already in a recession. There's a recession tomorrow, that sort of thing, for really the last 9 months. and they've been wrong at every step. And so there's a lot of momentum in the economy when it comes to the jobs, when it comes to the income, when it comes to the consumer spending. There's a lot of momentum in the economy, and those don't tend to turn on a dime absent some sort of crisis. And so then the question was like, does the banking turmoil, the bank failures just a couple months ago, is that enough of a crisis to turn the economy on a dime and send us into recession? And the fear was that it could have been. It doesn't look like it has, but it could have been. And so again, you're looking for something to cool the economy. Interest rates ultimately could do the trick or send us into recession in a bad way, but we're not there yet. And so we think the recession risks are pushed off until 2024. Famous last words for economists, I know, but it just seems like the underlying momentum is still quite strong in the economy. And so while the risks are real, they're kind of further into the future. Part of the issue with forecasting is not just understanding or hopefully understanding the dynamics of what's good or what's bad or what the trends may be. It's also identifying the timing. And right now, it's really hard to see when a recession could start. If it's not going to start tomorrow because of the jobs, income, and spending are still strong, it's going to be sometime in the future. And if you get the date of it wrong, if you say it's going to start in January, but doesn't start until June, that's an extra additional error in your forecast because you got the timing wrong above and beyond just the traditional forecast errors that we have. I mentioned the general fund forecast is up quite a bit. Here you can see we've raised the personal income tax forecast and the corporate excise tax, the two biggest components in the general fund, up roughly $1 to $2 billion a biennium into the future. Qualitatively, the slope of the lines, the trajectory of the lines, they look quite similar, but the gap between them, between the light blue bar or the light blue lines and the dark blue lines, it amounts to a couple $2 billion, right? So resources are up tremendously relative to what we were giving the legislature previously. And so there's more resources to spend on Oregonian priorities, whether it's housing or homelessness or education or behavioral health and all that sort of stuff. There's more resources. We'll see how the legislature goes about crafting the budget in the next couple of months. When it comes to lottery, it's up, but it's up less so. It's up about 1% for 23-25 relative to the previous forecast. It's going to be up a little bit more than that relative to the last time I chatted with you all. And a lot of it has to do with strength across the board, right? This is a round where our forecast for video went up, our forecast for traditional went up, and our forecast for sports in particular went up relative to what we had built into the forecast before. We've had growth in the forecast, but we're now anticipating stronger growth than what we were talking about just months ago. On the video side, the revenue reports, right? Revenue has been down on the video side relative to the reopening highs of the pandemic. It's kind of the chart on the left. You can see we have a seasonal swing to video lottery sales, and we saw massive record amounts of revenue and sales when we reopened from the pandemic. We had a lot of income, we had a lot of pent-up demand. We've been sheltering in place at our houses, or at least some of us did. We weren't going on vacations. We couldn't go to sporting events because they were restricted and all that sort of stuff. So there was a lot of pent-up demand, and we had the federal money boosting our household savings. And so we saw this huge surge in revenue as we were allowed to return to our everyday lives at least a little bit. And then the sales came off of that, right? We could go on vacations again. We got on airplanes. We went to sporting events. Maybe we did some long distance trips to Vegas or something like that. Like other entertainment options reopened, and sales came down, and we've spent down some of that excess savings, or that savings we built up early in the pandemic. We've spent, half of that down at this point from a economy-wide perspective. Now we're getting back to growth. But sales have been a little bit slower than anticipated the last 6 weeks, last 12 weeks or so. And so for the near term, for the next 6 months or so, we've lowered the forecast just a hair. The difference between the dotted gray line and the solid blue line, it's down just a hair, just keeping with the recent trends being a little bit weaker than anticipated, but not significantly so. What has changed is we've now explicitly went in and made sure we're adjusting for next year's record personal income tax kicker payout. We have a $5.5 billion kicker that'll be paid out to Oregonians next spring when we all file our tax returns. That's going to be a big shot, a big boost to disposable income to Oregonians. It's going to be spent, some of it on discretionary items. Some people are going to save it. Some people are going to spend it. Some people are going to spend it on a new kayak, on a new bike, on a trip to the coast, on a trip to, who knows, Paris. And some people are going to spend it going out to eat a little bit more. And so overall, video lotteries 0.4, 0.5% of total consumer spending, total personal income in the state of Oregon, right? It's a little less than 0.5%. And so if we're going to, see an increase in refunds in a short time period of $5 billion, in next spring, some of that's going to make its way into the bars and restaurants around the state as people go out to eat and enjoy, having a little bit more money in their pocket. So we think video lottery sales will see a noticeable boost next spring as well, on the order of magnitude $14-15 million, sort of above previous expectations. So again, $5.5 billion kicker, $14-15 million in additional video lottery sales. It's a relatively small percentage. It's not like everybody's going to go gamble with their newfound kicker money, but some of us will enjoy a night out more than we would have. The other thing I would highlight is the sports betting. It's kind of amazing is the forecast now, the dark bars, is now slightly above those initial estimates made by the research team at Lottery when you guys were thinking about approving and thinking about what the initial years could look like for sports betting in Oregon. And we had the old supplier, now we're on DraftKings, that sort of stuff. And even with the pandemic and even with the delayed seasons and the canceled games and all of that stuff that went in to professional sports in the last 3 years, the actual transfers out of sports betting have basically been right on the forecast. And we've now made sure we raised our forecast to account for that. We made a pandemic adjustment and then just kind of been watching how that's been going in recent years. But we've now raised the forecast given the strength and the growth. And we're expecting to see a couple more years of solid growth in the player base and associated revenues from that. The other thing to note here would also be the hold or the win percentage. Even if the volume of sales and the transactions on sports betting is maybe a little bit lower than the initial projections, the gaming revenue, the win percentage or the hold has been better than anticipated, and that's been consistent, has been holding steady, been persistent. And so overall, we're getting a higher win percentage, so then more transfers for every dollar bet and things like that, which also gives us confidence in raising that forecast. But you can see a couple more years of good growth in the underlying assumptions, 5-6 year ramp up period. That's a fairly consistent or a fairly normal ramp up period. When you look at things like, recreational marijuana in the state of Oregon, we had about a 5-year ramp up period for that of this newly legal world. And so I think something along those lines would make sense for this baseline trajectory today. We'll see how it plays out. But again, video's up, traditional's up, sports betting is up. One thing Mike mentioned, we did the bond rating meetings, presentations recently. One thing we talked with them about, and we included in our forecast document back in March. It's not in our document we released this week because we did it back in March, but we also spoke with the bond rating folks about it, is some work we had done. We partnered with the research team at Lottery, partnered with some of the getting the player survey, the customer base, the player base surveys results by demographics, and thinking through what the outlook could look like. Because one of the things we've been talking about and highlighting as a risk to the outlook for video in particular is what is the shift in our society and the age structure and demographics and generational preferences and stuff. What does that look like? What would that do to sales moving forward? Because it was the big picture concern was, well, what if the kids today, when they grow up to be, legal age and they grow up to be middle age, what if they want to do something else with their entertainment dollars and not gain as much as their parents did, right? That was one big risk that's been out there. And so if we look at the player surveys in the last 10, 15 years, the 20 somethings and 30 somethings, what percentage of them play video lottery on a monthly or annual basis? They've been holding pretty steady. So it doesn't look like the newly legal kids that have been young adults moving into the market are choosing to game at lower rates than in the past. So that's one of the aging demographic components. Looks to be not an issue so far, at least. Now, of course, it could be at some point, but not now. The other one would be, what is the shift in the composition of an aging society due to revenues, right? We have that large baby boomer generation that's retiring. What is that going to do to a lot of things in society, whether it's need for medical care, whether it's the impact on the labor market with the retirement, dragging down the labor force participation rate. Like there's a lot of things that the shifting composition of demographics will do to our economy. One thing it's probably not going to do to video lottery from here moving forward is be a weight on it. Is if we look at the composition of current Oregon video lottery players, it's predominantly 30, 40, and 50 something. And so as you age into your 60s and your 70s, it looks like maybe some of your playing preferences for those who game, the ones who do, is more maybe destination based. And so you see more casino based gaming, more Vegas based gaming, things like that, and less convenience gaming at the neighborhood pub. And so you can see in this chart here what it tries to do. It's a confusing chart. It's the perfect chart for an economist to use, I know, is takes the age structure of the gaming profile. So, how many 21-year-olds play, how many 31-year-olds play, how many 50-year-olds, like by age playing rates, and then kind of like roll that backwards and forwards across our population forecast, our demographic forecast that our office does. And you can see it kind of peaked in the mid 90s, right? That's kind of like when the big baby boomer generation would have been at their peak gaming rates for video lottery would have been, 25 years ago. And since then, it's been declining. So that aging population, that aging shift within our society of the demographics has been a weight on video lottery sales in the last 15 years. And I think we knew that, right? Like I think, the growth in the 2010s was very, very slow. And we largely attributed that to the fallout of the Great Recession and the financial crisis. And I think that's right. Income growth was very mediocre. But I also think there's this demographic component. But moving forward, you can see it's relatively stable. It's down a hair over the next decade, but not significantly so, not like it was in the last 15 years. And so why is that? It's, well, if 65, 75-year-olds are more destination-based gamers or not gamers at all, well, we've now had a lot of the baby boomers enter into those age cohorts. And then we now have the millennials in their 30s and increasingly in their 40s in the decade ahead, which are when you enter into your peak gaming years. And so overall, this demographic shift has largely fully been absorbed into the outlook, right? So I think that also provides a more solid, stable, stronger player base assumption in the years ahead because of this aging shift, the aging composition of our society. It's already in the rearview mirror from a video lottery perspective. So I think that's been encouraging to see as well. So again, thanks to the research team for helping me walk through some of these things as we're thinking about the forecast. The last thing I had for today is something I led off with, where we have kind of stable revenue resources for lottery. This current biennium to the next biennium, they're up a few $1 million. They used to be down a few $1 million, but roughly they're unchanged, which is good news and bad news, right? It does make budgeting a little bit more challenging. It does make operations a bit more challenging when you don't have a lot of growth in your underlying revenue streams. And so why are revenues kind of stable one biennium to the next? Sort of the bar on the left of the vertical line, the bar on the right of the vertical line. It's because we came off of those pandemic reopening highs, right? When we reopened, we reopened, we lessened our health restrictions and things like that, turned the machines back on, people go out to eat again. We just saw that record revenue, and that's come off, right? So within this bar are 2 different years, and we've come off of that bar, and so we have underlying growth on a year-to-year basis a little bit, certainly for video, after coming off of those highs. But you put them all together for the 2 years that are just now ending and the 2 years that are just about to begin this summer, and overall they're relatively unchanged, especially from a video perspective and from a traditional perspective, where we had those massive jackpots of $1 billion, $2 billion jackpots. We don't build in $2 billion jackpots as an assumption in our forecast. We kind of build an average size jackpot. So to the extent that we going from these record-setting jackpots or nearly record-setting jackpots on the traditional side to average jackpots in the forecast, that also looks like a reduction in revenues. Of course, time will tell exactly how those roll-ups occur and what the player behavior will be the next time we get to $1 billion jackpot and all that sort of stuff. And so I think there's some upside risk there, but it's also a way that we treat the forecast where we don't bank on another record-setting jackpot and then therefore be disappointed if it doesn't come to fruition. But overall, and then you can see after that, we see some solid growth due to underlying gains in the economy and the population and the player base and all that sort of stuff in the out years. With that, that's everything I had prepared. Here's my contact information. I'm always happy to chat anything Oregon economic revenue related. Give me a call, send me a text, send me an email. If you're interested in our work, you can follow our websites or our social media accounts if you would like. If not, I completely understand. And I will stop sharing my screen now. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to discuss.
Thank you for that. Any questions, comments from the commission?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Wilcox. I guess I'm just really happy to hear that it's going to be hopefully a moderate sized recession should this occur. But it is something obviously that's going to affect us all. But thank you so much, Josh.
All right, looks like next on the agenda, we need to discuss major procurement and scratch it ticket agreements.
Good morning, Commissioners. Interim Director Wells. For the record, I'm Kathy Stromberg, the Chief Marketing Officer here at the Lottery. And today I want to inform you of a major procurement for our Scratch It products. Next month, the Lottery products team will be seeking the Commission's approval to enter into a major procurement for the following vendors: IGT Printing, Pollard Banknote, Scientific Games International, Inc., for the purpose of holding prices firm for the purchase of Scratch It tickets, printing services, and associated deliverables. The three vendors are the only ones in the lottery industry who provide these Scratch It printing services. OSL is requesting to award a new agreement that will replace the current but outdated agreements. The current agreements have been active for over 13 years with multiple amendments to keep up with updates and changes. Each vendor agreement term has an expiration date of June 30th, 2023. To address needed updates for specifications and requirements more efficiently, it made more sense for us to start with a new agreement instead of continuing to amend existing agreements to address all these updates and term extensions. To ensure no lapse in the current service with our vendors while negotiating the new agreements, OSL will execute an amendment to extend the current term of June 30th, 2023. The contract extension shall be limited to a term of 90 days or upon the execution date of the new terms agreement, whichever comes first. The major procurement will support OSL's Scratch It vendor diversity for product development. To maintain a competitive vendor pool, each of the vendors mentioned above will enter into a new printing agreement to support the product development of OSL's Scratch tickets. This will provide OSL with the flexibility to mitigate the impact of supply chain constraints and encourage competitive pricing between the vendors. In addition, the package you received prior to this meeting also has additional contract structure in it. The agreement will be for 5 years with renewal terms on an annual basis. And with that, are there any questions?
Just one question, Kathy. So it sounds like it's just a cleaning up because it's going to, like, you built all these amendments over the time. Is it actually going to change the contract, or is it just consolidating and making it clean?
You're correct. It's you know, you know how this works, right? After a long time, it just seemed like a do-over or a start over was a better way to approach it, but it's really the same kind of contracts. There's no major change there.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to some rulemaking updates.
Thank you, Commissioners. Interim Director Wells, good morning. For the record, my name is Chris Scaro. I'm the Rules and Policy Analyst for Lottery, and I have two rulemaking updates for the Commission this month. So first, you may recall we moved from the scoreboard platform over to the DraftKings sports betting platform in January of 2022. At that time, we adopted new rules to govern the DraftKings platform. However, we kept the scoreboard rules in place to govern any activity on the scoreboard platform. For example, while play was disabled, players could still access their account, and Lottery honored any confirmed bets on future sporting events. However, at this time, all bets have settled and there are no remaining active player accounts on scoreboard. Therefore, we're asking to repeal the scoreboard game rules just to avoid any confusion. More information on this in your materials for those who are interested. Otherwise, I'll report back to the commission in July after the rulemaking process is completed. The other change is to amend our rule on non-sufficient funds to allow contract termination when a retailer has 4 NSFs in a 12-month period. And for context, we're not talking about NSFs in their personal finances, but it's referring to the weekly transfer that lottery does from each of its retailers back to the lottery. And each week we do have about 5 or 6 payments that are denied for insufficient funds. And that's out of a total of about 3,800 retailers. So for most retailers, this is no problem, but we do have some NSFs every week. Under our current rule as amended in 2018, as long as the retailer pays the amount owed plus a fee and posts a bond, a retailer can NSF every week without any consequences to their contract. However, repeated NSFs do create a lot of administrative work for lottery. We have to contact the retailer, ensure payment is made, disable equipment, verify the bond, etc. So we are proposing to allow retailers to have 3 NSFs in a 12-month period, but if they have 4, the amended rule would allow us to terminate the contract. The rule would continue to excuse any NSFs that are caused by bank error or bank closure, and the director would retain authority to make exceptions when circumstances warrant. Also, the rule will be prospective, so any NSFs a retailer currently has would not count toward the 4 that would start when the new rule takes effect if the new rule is approved. So we do have more information in the meeting materials. Our plan on this is to contact all of our current retailers and let them know that we are considering this change and request comment and questions from them. So I would report back to you on that in July. So that is all I have. Happy to answer questions on either of those if you have any.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Wilcox again. Without obviously naming any retailers, do the NSFs generally come from one category, say like a bar, or is it from more of a retail location?
I'm not sure that there's a specific type. It's more likely our video lottery retailers rather than traditional, although we do have traditional retailers who occasionally NSF. The frequent NSF people are mostly, the bars, restaurants with video.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Are there any other commissioner communications or any other business? Sorry. This concludes today's meeting of the Oregon State Lottery Commission. The next meeting is scheduled on June 23rd in Salem. Thank you all for attending today's meeting. This meeting is now adjourned.